artichoke.
All right, it's going.
Okay. Should we do like some sort of intro or like?
Yeah, we can introduce ourselves in that way.
Okay. Um. Hello, I'm Janine Morales. Pronouns are she, hers, her, she, her, hers. And today we'll be discussing the topic of privilege. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Ariana Proctor. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm excited to talk about this today. I've been like trying to learn a lot more about these topics, especially with all of the stuff that's been happening. And so, yeah, I'm just excited to talk about this as well. And yeah.
Hello, my name is Yusera Ali. I'm also excited to be here and talk about this. It's something, as Ariana said, something I'm trying to learn. Our pronouns are she, her, hers. Um, yeah, let's get this conversation started.
So I guess like a big like Janine said, the main topic we're discussing is privilege and kind of just like trying to break it down for people that may not understand it as well, and demystify it because there's this kind of stigma around the idea of like white privilege or privilege in general that we're like talking down on people or trying to make them feel like guilt. But I guess we're just here to like talk about that and especially for people that like want to learn more about it but just don't quite understand it.
Um, I think something to like first start off is privilege isn't necessarily like it's not only for uh, white cisgendered males. Um, like many different people have privilege. For example, I'm privileged. Like I experience privilege because I am a lighter skinned indigenous person who lives in America. I have clean running water, a roof over my head, um, a chance to be able to have this conversation with these two amazing women. And I mean, I'm able bodied. So that's something to start off. And I have many other privileges as well. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but at the same time, it's how can I redistribute that privilege or help those who lack privilege in certain areas? You know, how can I use my power, my privilege to do that?
Yeah, that's a big part about it. And I've like also realized like when I first learned about white privilege, it's not something that we associate with ourselves, but privilege is something that like almost every person has. Me being an able-bodied, cisgendered, um, documented American, um, living in America, although it has its faults, it still has like we're still privileged in regards to other people, and so it's important to acknowledge those things and not feel bad about it. I'm privileged being in college right now. A lot of people don't have that opportunity even, and so it's not like saying that you have things you don't deserve. A lot of people work for the privilege that they have, and it's not inherently bad. It can be used for good, and it's something that you should like you can be proud of depending on what type of privilege it is. Like if you have like college educational privilege, that's something you should be proud of. And there's certain privileges that people don't work for, but it's once again it's not inherently bad. It's like Janine said about what you do with it and how you use it to leverage and make the world a better place. And so it's one thing to have privilege and like not you don't have to feel guilty about it and like to work for it, but it's like another thing to have a lot of privilege and not use it to make the world a better place, because then it kind of starts to say something about you if you have all this privilege that you don't use for a good cause and like use it in a kind of selfish way. And while there's nothing wrong with like doing things for yourself with the privilege that you have, it's just nice to do things for other people and make the world a better place as well. And if you have the resources to do that, I guess that's a big part of like the talk around privilege.
And also acknowledging that you do have privilege. I mean, privilege, I think it, maybe I'm wrong here, but it's not necessarily something you work for. That's just something you have, something you're inherently born with, that doesn't make your life um, more difficult or make you have to work harder because of that privilege that you have. For example, um, with a white cisgendered male, you, like everybody works hard to get the things that they want or need in life. You know, if you want to go to school, then you work hard to um, get good grades. You know, but it's the fact that your skin color isn't making that more difficult for you because you don't have there's no biases surrounding you. There's no people trying to hold you down or different systems trying to hold you down or put in place to hold you down. Um, yeah, if you guys want to build on that.
Yeah, I was gonna add on how some people might think like if you have privilege, you have no problems. That's not what we're saying. If you have privilege, everyone has problems, everyone has issues. We're just saying you have an advantage of some sort, like a boost, as Janine said, like going to college for people who might have like families who've been to college to have more support. I know as a first generation student, I had no idea what I was doing. And I had friends saying, "Oh, I'm just gonna ask my sister. Like my sister has these scholarship things, or oh, my parent," and I was like, I don't know where to start or who to ask. So stuff like that. It's not saying you have no problems at all, but it's just saying you have some sort of advantage.
Yeah, that's another big thing that I've noticed around like what people think of when they hear about privilege is that it just means that you don't have any problems, and it doesn't mean that. It just means that like it lessens your chances of having problems due to that aspect of your identity. And so like of course everybody has problems, and I think a big thing that I'm like learning about recently is that like a lot of these structures that exist, they hurt white people just as much as they hurt people, like they hurt people of color more, but they hurt average and poor white people. And so it doesn't like just because of a certain identity you have, you can still fall into another category, which is what's like the important aspect of intersectionality is you can fall in multiple categories of like oppression or different identities that can either give you privilege or give you less privilege. And so it's not saying that you have no problems. Everyone is going to have problems in life. It just like you said, like some people have generations of family that went to college and have that kind of support network. And so it just, yeah, it kind of determines the obstacles you may or may not have to overcome in life.
Yeah. Um, Also, I feel like a privilege. It's how do we like move, not move on, but how do we solve? I don't know. It's not really an issue. It's an issue, but like you said, it's like having privilege. Some privilege is like it's a good thing, but at the same time, it's bad. I think it's bad when you don't recognize it or use that privilege for good and instead abuse it. Um, but yeah, how do we? I guess in this case, how are we defining privilege? Like, what privilege are we focusing on? Are we talking about the whole every single type of privilege, or like, yeah, if you understand what I'm trying to say.
If you want to go ahead and pause the recording really quickly. Alrighty. So something I think that's important to add is majority of people want to make society a better place for an equal place for people to live in. But what are the steps? What do the steps look like? You know, to get there. You know, for people with lighter skin tones and people who have, you know, where these systems are set up to help in life. You know, I think definitely acknowledging privilege is the first step to that. And I guess we can dissect what that actually means or what that looks like, you know?
Yeah, I agree. Taking steps is the beginning of it, but sorry, I just my mind just went somewhere else. Like acknowledging your privilege is a first step, and then I know some people who are trying to, make things more equal. I know for colleges, most colleges might specifically look for people of color, or scholarships might be targeted towards specifically people of color to kind of play out the playing field. But I know people don't like that. Some people get hurt by that, and they're like, "See, you are more." I've heard people saying, "Oh, see, black people that actually have more privilege than me because colleges want them and they don't want me." And I don't think that's really true. I think people are just trying to kind of uplift black people, people of color, and put them in these positions that they aren't in, and give them the privilege that other white people already have. So I'm kind of confused when people kind of get upset when there's scholarships targeted towards giving people of color so they can go to school, or college admissions specifically looking for students of color, or who come from financially, hard families. Um, but yeah, that's something I've noticed, is that people trying to be like, oh, see, people, and they try to use that against the whole privilege thing, saying, actually, you have more privilege than me just because of your skin color, that the scholarship just wants you, and it's hard for me to find the same funding.
Yeah, I agree. It's going to definitely take understanding and just continuing with a lot of these policies that help to uplift people that have been marginalized. And I think it also takes like an understanding of everybody, of just knowing that we all want, like, we all have basic, we, at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. We all just want our basic human needs met. And I think it just comes from like this feeling. I think a lot of people in power that have been in power for so long, or have benefited from a lot of the systems that we have in place, kind of feel hurt or threatened when they feel like it might be taken away. And that's where I feel like a lot of this comes from, of like demonizing the other, or like being upset when they start to see a lot of those resources like specifically targeted towards other groups, because they're scared of like the margin, like the oppression that they've seen in history happening to them. But I just feel like that's where understanding comes in communication, and just seeing like how communities have been hurt and what needs to be done to like empower them, and understanding that like a reallocation of resources doesn't mean that one group's gonna suddenly get less. We're trying to equal the playing field, not um, put another group on a pedestal. We're trying to like even a playing field that has been uneven since the founding of this country. And so that's what where it really is. And I guess just like having people communicate, so that like this fear of, oh, what I have is going to be taken away, isn't as prevalent.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's also what we see in the Black Lives Matter movement. People thought that by saying Black Lives Matter, you're saying that only Black Lives Matter, and Black Lives Matter is like above every other life, but that's not what we're saying. So I think, yeah, again, that understanding of these resources is not like everybody sees it as a competition. I've noticed that, like, um, uh, most recently too, people, I watched this YouTube video, and it was like a competition of who has like the most privilege and who doesn't. And someone was like, well, I'm black, I'm in the LGBT community, I'm this and that and that, so I like am forced off. Like, I don't know, people made it as some sort of competition, like who is the worst off. And I'm like, it doesn't have to be a competition. We all deserve, the basics. But in order to do that, I think it's preaching equity versus equality. um, yeah.
And I think this like idea, as resources are being relocated um, to communities or people who, you know, in the past wouldn't have gotten those resources, like there's this fear with the people who do have these privileges. They have this fear that that somehow it's going to run out, like there's not going to be enough resources. Um, but in reality, there's endless amount of resources. There's endless amount of support. Um, but it's about like helping our brothers and sisters like get ahead, or like get like have that even equal playing field, or even playing field, or not even like what's that word, like not equal, but
Equity.
huh?
I think you're talking about equity.
Yes, I think. Um, I keep forgetting my point, but go on.
Yeah, that like when I think about that, I think a clear example of that is with Jeff Bezos and Amazon and all of that, and how he has like all of this money that he'll never in his lifetime spend, and like the huge gaps that exist even within our own society and country of like these billionaires and then these people that are like homeless and don't even have like a house to sleep in, or people that work for him like they get paid not enough, or migrant workers that come here and don't get paid enough, and how like people complain like, oh, if you just work hard enough then you'll get to where you need to be, but like our society is not set up that way. And I think it's hard to realize that if you're not in the shoes of people. But like even from my own experience, my mom, she's worked all her life and like we're not rich. Like there's some people that can work at their entire life and still struggle, and so that's just the way our society is set up. And so I think a big misconception people have is that like, oh, people are just aren't working hard enough, and that's not the case. Some of the poorest people work harder than the most richest people. It depends on just how lucky you are, and privilege plays a big part in that. And I think that's something people need to realize.
Yes, and so for example, like a lot of people of color, a lot of our communities, we don't have this. Okay, for example, with my family, I grew up in a family. My mom was well, she is a single mom. I mean, she has a spouse right now, but me growing up, I grew up helping my mom a lot because I'm the oldest out of 8 kids. She was a single parent, so she was being both the provider and the nurturer. And um, nobody in her past, nobody in her family, like she didn't have that support to teach her about like credit early on, building financial wealth or looking at money as a tool. It kind of like was just to get us to like just to make ends meet. That was what she was working for. And um, with a lot of people in my family, it's that way. It's not until me and my husband now we're looking at purchasing our first home, and we're in our early 20s and we're learning about credit. But looking at our parents, like they didn't know anything about credit, growing up. They didn't um, understand the steps and structures to like buying their first home, or um, savings, or really any of that financial literacy that a lot of people with privilege like grow up knowing. Like that's just mm, like that's just passed down. That's knowledge that's passed down. Yeah. And so I mean that's like one example of like how a lot of these communities, like it's not that we're not working hard enough, it's that we don't have that like that understanding or that education to look like know how to save or use our money for us instead of just getting by, just trying to get by, trying to survive in this economy, in this world that isn't really meant to help us in any way. Especially with the older generations, like our parents and our grandparents. You know.
I still think that the whole working hard thing, it kind of it, uh, it's unrealistic for most people. I'm not saying like working hard is unrealistic, but like the expectations they want for you. I remember I was watching this video and this dude was like, all you have to do is work hard. Even if you just have a high school degree, I'll just get like two full-time jobs. That's like 80 hours a week. They're expecting people to work to get to a position that other people probably don't have to do as much work. And again, with even if you work hard, there's still things against you. Like if you work a minimum wage job and you work hard, that's still not going to get you pretty far. Um, and again, I'll like where you live might be high rent. All these other things, all these systems are still against you, no matter how hard you work. So it's about like, I don't know. It's I think when people say work hard, it's like it's not just work hard, you make money, and then boom, you have all these other opportunities open to you. Um, like stuff like your name could prevent you from getting a job. Someone can see your name, it's like, okay, I don't want them, or they can see how you look, like again, the skin color thing, and that can also prevent you from getting more jobs. So it's not just about working hard, because no matter how hard you work, there's still stuff that's going to be against you.
Yeah, I've noticed a lot of people, they have this viewpoint, like it's they notice that there's obviously like discrepancies between communities, where communities of color and marginalized communities, of course, like have problems within the communities, like, you know, there's like, it's statistical evidence. But a lot of people kind of jump to the argument that like, well, it should be these communities' personal responsibility to like work hard and pick themselves up by the bootstrap because, you know, our family did it, or, you know, like a lot of stories that they have. And while there's always going to be exceptions, you know, there's always going to be people that like exceed all odds and become successful. That's just unrealistic to expect of everybody. Everybody has different circumstances, and like there could, it should be the country's responsibility to help each other, because the country will only ever be as good as like the worst off people in the country. If we have extremely poor people in the country, we're not going to be a good country. And so it should be its responsibility and the government's responsibility to help the people, especially if it's circumstances that were put on by the country. And you had mentioned redlining, which I'll let you talk about a little bit, but a lot of this generational wealth and what your family has done in like past generations has an impact on your life and the potential that you have. And while like, yeah, a poor kid from the ghetto could become successful, like if they exceed all odds and have the right circumstances and get lucky sometimes, it's not realistic to expect everybody from poor communities to do that, especially if the resources just aren't there. And so expect, like, even talking about how like a lot of what your family owns, what your family knows, what your family does has an impact on like what you know and what you can do in this society, in this capitalistic society. And so yeah, it just plays a big part in that, and just expecting everybody to pick themselves up by their bootstraps and exceed all odds, and like not just like thinking for a second like how realistic that truly is. I think it's just important for people to evaluate that way of thinking.
Yeah, I totally agree. I know I've been used like as an exception thing. My parents have like some white friends, and whenever I bring up about like socialism and taking care of people who don't have the resources, I know they're like, "Well, you made it. Like you're going to college. Like why can't these other people do it?" My two older brothers, they're not in college, and they're confused. They're like, "What happened to them? Like why aren't they in the same position as you are?" And I'm just like, I probably got a bit lucky to be where I am. I don't think there's such thing like like an exception. Um, but yeah, when people, so I hate that. Like, I know some people might use us three as an exception. Like, look at them. They came this far. In some way, we are lucky because if it wasn't for Clark, we wouldn't be in this position or met the people we have. Um, and we wouldn't have the education about networking and all this other stuff. So yeah, it's not. It's some people do get lucky. And it's not just about hard work because I know a lot of students from NCAS who work hard, and a lot of my class dropped out this semester. And I remember how everybody was so excited for college and they're like applying, and now in Snapchat it's like, hey, I just dropped out of college because can't afford it, I can't afford it, or this and that. So yeah, and then I know Jimmy wants to ask something before I talk about redlining and property taxes.
Real quick before we touch on redlining and property taxes, I think it's important to discuss that, like when I when I started going to college, when I went my first year, I had this weight on my shoulders because I was the first in my family to attend college, and so I'm sure you both can relate with this, with being the first in your family to do this, to go to school or go to college. Like there's people, family members looking up to you, looking at you, like you kind of have that sense of, what's the word, like responsibility, or like um we'll go with responsibility to like succeed, because if you don't, then like that cycle isn't going to end with you, and your siblings are looking up to you to do this great thing, and if you fail, well then what does that say to them? What does that say? Like, are you just like, there's another statistic, from the Montbell area, kid who got into college, but ended up dropping out because different things that are set up against you, whether that be, for me it was my unawareness of mental health, and also lack of support back at home, you know, and whatever that looks like for um, whatever person who is first gen, you know, there's whereas somebody who is um, somebody like Mr. Clark, you know, he had that support. I don't think he was the first in his family to go to college, or he, the many people in his family who did go to college. You know, like that wasn't one thing that they had to worry about or had to think about. You know.
I just want to add really quickly, if that's okay, like a part about the responsibility. I think that's um a big issue, because I know that growing up, because of like the way I am, I heard a lot of people say like, oh, you act white, you don't like you don't act like other black people, and there's this association with communities of color that you're supposed to act a certain way. I think it says a lot about the history of our country, of like so many communities of color haven't even had the opportunity to reach these levels of success. And so now that people are, it's like such a crazy thing to see. And I think it's also important for people to realize like there's all these factors. And I think that's a big part of privilege, is that there's like so many layer, I don't know, yeah, there's just like a lot of factors to it. And so even like people within communities of color have certain privileges over others. Like if you have a mental disability, a physical disability, that's another thing that's holding you back from achieving success. And so, or like not even success, but like from breaking through generational curses. And I just wanted to add that in.
Yeah, the whole responsibility thing and mental health. Uh, I didn't really like my first semester of college. My mental health was so bad, but I was like, I can't get my grades down. Like I have to keep them all A's because these expectations. I remember my sister. She's in high school, and she was, Medicus. She was talking to Medicus, and I said hi, and he's like, "How are you? Like, how are your grades?" And I'm like, "I have 1B," and he's like, "You have 1B. You have to make sure you get that up." And I was like, "Yeah, I'll try." But yeah, it's like a lot of pressure because everyone is just like watching you, especially with like me being valedictorian. Everyone expects these like big things, and I'm just trying to pass at the like minimum. Um, and yeah, I was just working. Like I would wake up, school, and then eat if I remember to, and then work even more. Because these expectations, you don't want to be that statistic. You don't want to be that statistic. You don't want to be like that person. And I was just watching all my friends just drop out, and then there's me, and I'm just like I can't join them. Um, so yeah, that's one thing. And now about redlining. In my sociology class, we talked about redlining within the housing market. And with what redlining is like people specifically choosing not to sell to people of color in like white neighborhoods or like very rich neighborhoods, and then choosing to sell in neighborhoods that have more people of color and where the rent or the property taxes are like lower. The thing about property taxes is the higher the mortgages, like the higher the property taxes are, the more funding school gets. So here, like Montbello, since it's mostly a community full of poor color, the schools are not going to get as much funding because the property taxes aren't as high as maybe a school in Cherry Creek. I'm not the best at explaining it, but yeah, how much like the housing value affects the funding the school gets, um, and the type of houses people get depends on the person selling it. Most people choose to sell to white people. So if you try to get a place in a white neighborhood, it's going to be so much harder. But then if the thing is, if more white people moved into a neighborhood like this, then you have gentrification, where property tax property taxes start rising up, and people who live here can no longer afford to live here. So it's kind of like a tricky situation, um, because if you in order to like mix people in a neighborhood, that means taxes and stuff will go up and people can't afford to live there anymore. But at the same time, having people segregated in the way that it is, that means less funding and less resources for people in the community.
Yeah, I remember when I first learned about that, I was like really surprised, and I realized that we had pretty much lived through that experience because of the school we went to and how it was underfunded and was during to be closed multiple times. And like I think I see that how that plays into privilege a lot of the time because of like the way that white people in this country started off versus the way that people of color in this country started off, you know, and like white people had the opportunity to buy homes and go to college and accrue this wealth. And a home is a big portion of your wealth. That's something a lot of people don't know, but like it plays a big part into your wealth. And so if like generations ago, like 2 generations ago, like people of color either weren't allowed to buy a house or like not a house with as much money, then that's gonna play a factor into the amount of wealth someone has, and also the fact that property taxes fund schools. Like it literally kind of sets up this system. A lot of people hear about systemic racism but like kind of shut themselves off to that too because they don't think that like there's racist laws and that's what they think it means, but it's not what it means. And so like kind of it's a system, and a part that plays into it is the property taxes that fund schools. And so if certain schools are less funded and those less funded schools have majority people of color, then they're going to get not as good of an education. And so that's going to play a part into the college they get to go to, their future careers. And it creates this big cycle that's really hard to break out of. And a lot of people say like, oh, bus them to better schools, which it like doesn't create a good solution, like a long-term solution, because there's still going to be people that have to go to that bad school, and you can't bus everybody to the good school. It doesn't structurally fix the problem. And I think a lot of people like don't want to look at the root causes of problems or don't want to look at like how to structurally change problems because it will require like examining their own privilege and how they benefited from it. But I think it's really important because it's statistic, like all of this is statistical, it's undeniable. And I think the conversation should be around like what we should do to fix it rather than focusing on like if it's a problem to begin with, because it definitely is.
Sorry for look down. I'm like putting notes so I don't forget things. Like you were saying, instead of just trying first we have to realize it's a problem. The thing is, we have to, yeah. I feel like most of our arguments is this a problem? And at this point, it has to move on from. It does. I think most people can agree it is a problem, but it's about getting, I guess, the people in power to realize it's a problem. But then when people do realize it's a problem, the only thing that happens is they kind of put like a bandage on the situation. Like you said, no one really gets to the root of things because I feel like in order to solve the problem, these systemic issues, we have to like break everything down. It's not something that you just feel like, oh, okay, um, let's give more funding to these schools because at the end that won't help and it will just I don't know. Um, it's more complicated than most people make it to be. It's not something that you can easily just like slap a band-aid on it. Um, but yeah, as you said, we have to get to the root of these issues.
Yeah, like none of these issues that we're discussing, like it's not just one thing, it's multiple layers, you know. And please pick up your cornbread. But yeah, I'm agreeing with you.
And I think it's like interesting how all of this does tie into privilege because a lot of people probably think that they're not connected, but it's all connected. And the more even I learn about it, I continue to like, I'm just amazed by like this type of stuff. And so I read How to Be an Anti-Racist over the summer, and it connected so many things for me. And like kind of just tying back to how like it's not bad to have privilege, it's not inherently bad, and it's not something people should be guilty about. And I think a lot of the stigma around the idea of privilege comes from people that have privilege, thinking that it's like an attack on them or that they should feel bad about it. But it's not that. It's just like there's all of these problems that we have empirical evidence that it exists. And so it's just using the privilege that you have to kind of help fix these issues because it will make a better world for all of us. If more people of color have the opportunity to get better education from a young age, aren't policed as much and have more access to resources, then it's going to make the economy better for all of us and the country better for all of us. And it's something that people in power don't want us all to know because they're benefiting from the cheap labor that we give them. They're benefiting from us not being educated and like taking control of the policies and everything that runs this country. And so they're benefiting from us being uneducated and from us believing what they tell us without looking into it ourselves. And so that's why it's really important to just educate ourselves and understand the ways that we've benefited and how we can use that to help uplift everyone, because we're all like we're all, unless you're like an elite rich person. We're all within the same system together, and we're all the people, and so it's up to all of us to help make the country better for each and every other person.
Yeah, adding on to what you're saying, like people empower, make it hard for everyone else. I think in order to like truly move, like every single person has to be on the same page or have a similar understanding. Um, I was watching this one video. It was Bill Gates, and he said he will never run for president because he has the money to make changes. If he doesn't, like charter schools, a lot of people are against it, but Bill Gates had like the money to like fund like all these advertisements and all this stuff, and ended up like he really loves charter schools, so he used his money to like push that, and now we have more charter schools. So it's about like everyone being on the same page because the people in power they can use their because they have so much resources, way much resources than most of us combined. Um, so yeah, as you said, we have to like be on the same page. We all want the same things, and we instead of blaming people who have the ability to change what's going on, we blame the people who are under us. You hear a lot of people complaining about how their taxes are funding someone else's like food stamps and all this stuff, and it's like you're like literally angry at the wrong person, at the wrong people, and then they get mad when we want to tax people with a lot of money. They're like they've worked so hard for that, but it's like not really. If you're like a CEO, all you do is just sit there. Um, but I'm not saying like they don't work hard, but people, it's like they want something, but they're not willing to have the change to help benefit them. They're like, we're going to raise taxes, but it's not going to affect most people. It's going to affect people in power, so they will give back to people who are least advantaged, who have disadvantages. But yeah, people tend to blame people who don't have privilege or power, saying that you are the problem, that you're the reason why our nation is the way it is, but it's the other way around.
I saw something somewhere that said like, isn't it funny how like people like try to dictate or coach like people who are in poverty how to or what they should be spending their money on, but at the same time when we're talking about 1 percenters of the people who are very rich, we're like, oh, they worked very hard, like they deserve that, like they can do what they want with their money. Um, yeah, that was just a random, well, not random, but quick thought.
Yeah, I noticed that people get shamed. Like, if you're a low income person, you get shamed for like using your money. They're like, oh, you're already broke, so you should like put that money in savings and all this other stuff. And then it's like people, it's like we're already struggling, but then you shame someone else for like taking time to like help out their to just enjoy life a little bit. I've also noticed that like people shame you work hard for your money, but then that money isn't really used for you to be like happy. It's just to use it to really survive.
Yeah, I remember having a debate with someone about this topic, and I had made the comment that like, in order for people to be rich, there has to be people on the bottom, and then they agreed with me, even though they were like against me on the topic. But then that's when I realized that a lot of people they have this mentality that like there will always have to be people that suffer, so it best not be me, and that's what a lot of people like have this mentality. And they're like, as long as it's not me that's suffering, then I'm okay with people suffering. And a lot of people that are in power have that mentality. And um, I think that a lot of people that are comfortable with like privilege also have the mentality they're like, well, I'm comfortable in life, and so I know that there's people suffering, but it's not me. It's their responsibility to make their lives better. It's not mine. And while you shouldn't like place the responsibility of making the world better on yourself, it's good to have that collective mentality of knowing that it could be you, and so like it's nice to make the world better for the next person over. And yeah, just a big part of like profit and the way our country is run is based on that mentality of there's going to have to be people at the bottom, and as long as it's not me, I'm okay with it. And a lot of people think it's like complaining when people that are at the bottom of the system complain about how they've been treated because they're not in those shoes, but if they were in those shoes they'd be complaining. And I think we kind of see this now with a lot of what's going on about how people are like um, rioting at the Capitol because they feel like they're being oppressed in some type of way, or like they feel like there's like something that they need to protest about. Like when people are feeling hurt by a system, they act out, and you never really understand until you're in those shoes. And I think that's, it's like a big problem that we have, is like not understanding each other. Because when we had the Black Lives Matter protests, and we had people of color protesting, and people that are allies, and people that understand the issue protesting, people that don't understand it because of their comfortability and their privilege, or like had privilege but didn't understand, like chose, like looked down on it. But like people that have privilege now that are protesting, they know, they kind of associate themselves with the hurt that people that such as people that rioted at the Capitol feel. And so I think if people don't associate with the hurt another group feels, it's hard for them to connect. And so I feel like we just have like a lack of being able to connect with others and the hurt that they're feeling. And that's something that I think we like have to work towards.
Yeah, I agree. It's hard to see a problem if you're not surrounded by it. I was watching, I don't know what documentary, but it's talking about how your social media is specifically targeted about you and your beliefs. So our minds, all I hear about is like social justice and all this stuff, but someone else, they see the complete opposite. So it's kind of hard to talk with someone when they're just surrounded by, all these ignorance and all this stuff like that. And also going back to connecting with other people, I think the United States is very individualistic. It's all about you and you getting to the top, and it doesn't matter who you have to get, whose way you have to go into. But again, we have the resources for everyone to live a comfortable life. But we're all about capitalism and trying to market off of anything and produce money in any way possible. Um, and with that, I think that kind of throws away a lot of people. Like you said, it's all about me. And if I get to the top and you don't, that's a you problem because people can easily just shut it out. People who have money and like privilege, they can just turn off the TV. Um, they can stay in their house, go outside. I also noticed that with the coronavirus, when everybody was saying like stay home, and people were getting upset with some people who weren't staying home, but it's like staying home comfortably and being safe at home is also a privilege. Um, I heard there was like domestic abuse violence that increased. And then these celebrities who are at home, they're like, you guys don't like staying home, but there's so much things to do at home. But so you guys have these mansions. We can't, do the same things you do. You guys go outside in your pool. Most of us are stuck in our bedrooms, in small, cramped houses with like a bunch of families. Um, so yeah, it's about this connection, and trying to understand each other, but it's hard to do that if you haven't experienced it. Uh, so it's like how do we get people to understand something they've never experienced, or is it possible to understand something you've never been through?
I think it starts with connecting with people who are different than you, because when you start having conversations with people who don't have similar black backgrounds as you, like I think you find that humans we're more alike than we are different. And like it goes back to basic needs being needing to be met. And you know, having that empathy for one another, and having these conversations, being willing to hear a different side of the story than what you're used to. Um, and then we start to realize like, oh yeah, these things do need to change. You know, what can I do to change that? You know, um, something that is unrelated to race or privilege in that aspect is having an abled body. That's something that um, we can all look to as like you are definitely privileged if you have an able body. I worked back in 2018. I was a direct support professional, somebody who helps take care or helps in the day to day take care of people who have developmental uh, like I'm sorry, I this last month of pregnancy is really frying my brain. But like developmental disability disabilities, physical disabilities, and I was completely unaware of my privilege in that aspect of being able-bodied until I started working with that group of people. You know, when we would go to um, say an outdoors activity, and I would be looking to park the van, and there would be no handicap parking spaces. Like that would be very difficult for the people that I was working for, my clients, you know. Um, and so, how can looking at that, looking at like obviously we need to be doing more to make um, places more accessible for people who have disabilities. But look at that on an even broader scale of privilege and look, I don't know, it's just something that's so broad. And back to what we were saying earlier is we all benefit from a privilege some way or another, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but how it's like stepping into the shoes of somebody who doesn't have those same privileges as you to fully understand what their day to day looks like and what their like what you can be doing to better their situation or better the situation for the world or for future generations in general. Um, yeah, I know that was a bit off topic, but I think it kind of helps.
I was going to add, yeah, about being more inclusive. I also noticed that in CAS and other schools too, like students who have either like physical or like mental disabilities have a harder time like graduating on time or even entering college. When I took courses at CCA, there was this one girl, she was blind, and she but she didn't let that like get in her way. She's like, I know it's gonna be like hard for me to pass my classes and understand. But she was like very committed to make sure that she graduated and got her associate's degree. But that's something like no one else would like. That's not something that you will have to worry about with other people. Like how are you able? How will you be able to like take a test in class, or how will you able to be able to communicate in class if you like can't hear everyone else? Um, and also jobs, like when you people get hired, you're less likely to get hired if you have some sort of disability. um, yeah, it's about being more inclusive. Like when you go to a store, you don't have to worry about if there's a bunch of staircase, you're just gonna walk up on them. You don't have to worry about is it a wheelchair accessible, and all these other different things. Or people who go to fast food restaurants, trying to order if you're deaf and trying to like do sign language. It's hard to like get these basic things that everybody else gets when you have something you have no control over. Most things, most of these privileges that people have, they get it for doing like nothing or for just being born the way they are. Um, and that's not what most people talk about. It's like, yes, you work to be where you are, but at the same time, how you were born impacted a lot of it.
Yeah, and I think what you all are talking about makes me think about how like why it's so important for people to like for us to leverage our privilege that we do have to help others that may not have the same privileges, because this pick you up by yourselves bootstrap mentality doesn't work, especially in terms of like structural changes. Because if a group or a community does not have the resources or the capability to fix things, and how are things going to get fixed if no one's helping them? Like for disabled people, they can't go out and literally build these um, guard like these things themselves to give them access to a building. People that don't have any like access or power in the government can't literally go in and change laws if they don't like have the necessary education or the resources to do it. And so it's really important for people that have those resources to help empower those. And it's not saying that like we want people with privilege to do everything for us. That's not what people say. They just need their help. And the like especially in the initial stages of using that power and that privilege and those resources that they have to empower them to make the changes that they need to make in their own lives and for the better of society.
Yeah, I think most people think they'll be hurt if they do use the resources they have. And it's like you're still gonna be fine if you took a couple minutes out of your day to help someone out, or to it's literally like the smallest things you could do. Sign a petition or call up your Congress people or voting, because your votes do count. How you use your money, how you spend it, if you support companies, but like, and then also that's another thing I talked about this in my philosophy class. It's kind of like a privilege to help the world in a way. Mostly, I was thinking about environmentalism. Everybody's like, oh, you should recycle. You should like ride your bike to work. You should cut on your use of fossil fuels. But it's like people who don't have the money to do that can't do that because it's expensive, to like be to buy organic stuff, to buy recyclable, reusable things. And it's like sometimes it feels like only people who have the resources, have the money, have those chances can actually make those changes, can actually help the world. But most of the time, people who have those resources aren't willing to like use them or to like share those resources because not everyone can just ride their bike to work, or buy an electric car to help cut down on carbon emissions and all these other things. Um, but yeah, it's like a privilege to be able to help people in a way.
I remember back in 2018 when I was first starting out, like my journey into like eating cleaner, eating vegan. Um, I and I was talking to like friends back home and my family who lived in Montbello, who lives in Montbello, like kind of like talking to them about like eating healthier and veganism and why um, people shouldn't eat meat. And I soon realized, very quickly realized that like that's a privilege, you know, to be able to eat healthy, to eat vegan, you know, and be health conscious in general, you know, especially coming from a neighborhood like Montbello where um, just a few short years ago it was a food desert, you know. We had recently gotten that Walmart that's on Chambers, but prior to that it was I mean, I guess you could still consider it a food desert. And people like it's yeah, that's a privilege that I soon became aware of, you know. And it starts with okay, getting the resources to people who need it, and also how do you educate a community on eating healthier, where majority of the community suffers from um, serious health problems like diabetes or heart disease, you know, which stems from lack of health foods, you know, or vegetables and stuff like that, you know. And so, I don't know, it's just, there's just so many layers to pinpoint, you know, and yeah, I was a bit of a tangent.
I kind of want to add on when we're talking about like health issues. I've I was reading some stuff and watching some documentaries about inequalities in hospitals and how people of color usually don't get treated. Even like women of color, they're more likely to die during birth, and that's because people believe that people of color like have high pain tolerance or things like that. And also, since there aren't that many people of color as doctors, it's hard for people of color to trust doctors and believe what they're saying, so they end up not taking the doctor's advice. That's definitely true for my family, my parents. The doctors would say something like, they're just lying, or they're just trying to kill us, or blah, blah, blah. Um, so there's also this kind of lack of trust because there's lack of representation, because it's like, how do you know what I'm going through? And just try to make those changes, like you said. If you're surrounded by a bunch of like fast food, it's easy. You don't have to worry about it, and it's easier to feed a whole family than going out to buy ingredients every single week to make new meals to feed your family. Um, but yeah, there's a lot of inequality when it comes to like health in total. because first of all, people of color don't get their health needs met, um, and it's kind of hard to have someone understand your needs when they haven't been experiencing it.
Yeah, those are such real problems too. Like even with like the death rate of people of color and how they like the redlining situation has a lot of people of color live in these food deserts near highways with a lot of pollution near factories. Like all of that plays into a factor, and there's so much that goes on that people are just so unaware of, and privilege plays a big part in that. Um, and yeah, just how you talked about like the about black women dying faster during childbirth. And I remember for one of my classes last semester, I did a reading about the different stereotypes that exist and where they came to be, and all of it's just like it's a big system, which is where the term systemic racism comes from. And I think it's important to pinpoint, like you said, acknowledging our own privilege within that system, so that we can know what we like, what our part is. Because even the most disadvantaged people can have a part to play in making the world better. It's not like some people just shouldn't do anything to make the world better. You know, everyone has a part to play. We're all in this together, and I think it's important to pinpoint your spot in the world so that you can know the part you can play in making the world a better place.
I know that Harvard has like this prejudice test that people can take. My sociology teacher was taking it. It's free. And when you take this, like, not test, but like this kind of quiz, afterwards it tells you what um, prejudices that you have towards people that you might not even be like conscious of, um, or like things. I don't know. I haven't taken it yet because I haven't had the time, but I think it's something cool that most people should do to understand something they might see as normal, but at the same time, it's like, no, it's not normal the way you're thinking. It kind of hurts other people. I know we talked about health inequality, but it's also environmental inequality I learned about last semester in my philosophy class. When people talk about environmental like change, they usually don't talk about how it affects people of color and people in low income neighborhoods. Like pollution usually affects people in low income neighborhoods. Low income neighborhoods are usually built by factories or um, they're more polluted. But then when people talk about environmentalism, they only think about like saving the forests, but it goes way much. Like environmental issues impact everyone. And I know there's an activist group that's currently trying to get people from all walks of life to get involved in environmental policy because all these things that we might think don't impact us, like every single thing humans have touched and human ideas have touched. So at the end of the day, there's like some sort of inequality involved with it.
I will have to go soon to get to my next class, but I don't know if there was any like last ideas that we wanted to talk about or touch. Um,
I think something to note is if you're wary of believing that there's privilege in the world or that you benefit from privilege, be it white privilege, able-bodied privilege, cisgendered privilege, religious privilege, whatever it be. Um, I think the most obvious thing right now to point to privilege is the thing that happened at the Capitol, the riots or domestic terrorist stuff that happened. You know, if that group of people were any other color, um, any other race, they like that the outcome would have been completely different. You know, there would have been a heck of a lot of bloodshed, many more arrests, many more deaths. But I don't know if you guys want to touch on that a little bit. I'm helping my toddler out with some stuff, and it's hard to focus.
yeah, we talked about that a little earlier about before we started recording about like what just happened is a clear example of privilege. Like it's pretty apparent. I don't know, like because in the summer when there were protests around the nation and riots, because people were upset about the way that about police brutality and the reaction that the police, that the president, that the nation had against these people. And not even I don't know the exact percentage, but it's a very small percentage of protests that actually became violent. And I also personally don't think that um, property should be placed over like the human lives that were lost that led to the riots and the protests. But not even a big percentage of them were violent. And then a week ago we had this coup at the Capitol where people like stormed it and were threatening the lives of people, literally building hanging things and just like doing crazy stuff. And like police officers died and people died. And like seeing the different reaction of people versus that, like in like if you like look at the demographics of the people that stormed it, it just says a lot about privilege and like what people have been trying to explain and say all along. And I think this is just like a real life representation of privilege. And it's kind of hard to deny that.
Yeah, I think some people, I know some, I on TikTok at least, some people are like, I know I didn't believe in privilege, but with everything that's happened, it's obvious it's privilege because if it was a black man, a bunch of people of color who stormed the Capitol, it would have been a whole different reaction. And the fact that the stuff that the people who stormed the Capitol got away with was so bad, and people, when I heard the news about it, people weren't saying that like they were terrorists because they were like that's an act of terrorism. They weren't being called names. They weren't, being. They didn't get as much bad rep from it from the news, at least I think, than like, Black Lives Matters did. Um, and even now, I think it kind of has died down, like the talk about the what has happened at the Capitol. But with the Black Lives Matter movement, the protest, like people kept talking about it and how people are bad and all about the rioting and looting. And some people try to justify the whole Capitol thing. They're like, oh, but we didn't burn down buildings, we didn't do this and that. But it's like you guys literally, I don't know. It was a lot, and I'm just like, I don't know how people can justify what has happened at the Capitol because that has never happened in history. And the fact that people are trying to say that's okay, it's not okay.
Yeah, do you have to go like right now, or do you
I
would you
have
have
I have a few more minutes.
okay. One last thing that I think would be helpful to cover is how has lack of privilege affected us and how has privilege benefited us? Or do you think we already kind of covered that earlier?
I think we can like go over just in case and end with it. I think I've like seen lack of privilege in my life with my identity as a black woman, growing up in the society that I have, and like, I've seen like how that's like how my life has been different than a lot of the people I go to school with now. That's I think it's becomes even more real to me now that I'm in college, because in high school and growing up, everybody around me was like similar, but now I'm like the world is a lot different than I thought it was, and now I see how my life is a lot like was a lot different than a lot of the people I go to school with now. But like being low income and the experiences I've had to go through at a young age that a lot of people don't, um, having like yeah, just I think a lot of that, and I think me being cisgendered, me being born as an American citizen, me being able-bodied, all of those also benefit me because it like while my life is hard in certain aspects because of like my economic status and my race, I don't have to like worry about like getting through everyday normal tasks as much or um, feeling exiled or like facing like I don't know, life or death situations because of my gender or my sexuality. So all of those have had an impact, and the ability to vote. I've realized is also a huge privilege that I have because a lot of people don't even have that, and I'm sure there's more that I have to learn about and dissect more. But yeah,
Yeah, same here. I when it comes to like being I'm a sorry, I can't talk. I'm able-bodied, so that's something I don't have to worry about. Also, I'm a kind of a lighter skin tone, so I've noticed that my siblings who are like darker than me, they have to deal with like my in my culture, skin bleaching is a real thing. So every time like my aunties or like people, family come over, they always like tell them, you should bleach your skin, blah blah blah. You look so much prettier if you had lighter skin and all this stuff. And that's not something I've heard or been told. So that's like some way I've been like I don't have to deal with that type of bullying or like that type of harassment from family members. But at the same time, I'm like constantly worried. First of all, I'm not a U.S. citizen, even though I'm a permanent resident, so I don't have to like be worried about being deported. But that's like a real thing. I'm like constantly worried. I'm in the process of becoming a citizen, but you know, it's always at the back of my head. Like, what if something happens and something happens to my family and they deport us? Like, I haven't been in Africa for like 12 years, so that's something I'm always worried about. And also, yeah, being in college, you notice how life has been so much different from everyone else and how much like and that also makes me worried. I'm just like, okay, at NCAS, it was kind of a bit easier to get these good grades or do all these things. But now everyone here, they've had more experience than me. They had more challenging stuff than me. They have access to these textbooks and like resources that I don't have access to. Um, and then at the end, it's after I graduate, I'm still worrying about will I get a job? Will I have the resources to get there? Because it's not just about getting a degree. You can have a degree and it can mean nothing to someone. So that's also something I'm trying to not like constantly like. Yeah, I'm just a word person, and that mostly has to do with my identity. Um, because I've noticed that being Muslim and being African has kind of impacted what programs I get accepted into or how people treat me. But I'm just like I'm a normal person. There's nothing like when people are like, oh, my chocolate, blah blah, all these like trying to see people of color like as these exotic animals and stuff like that. And I'm just like, no, we're just humans. Treat us like humans, and I'll be myself. Don't make it more than it has to be.
Um, Privileges that I carry with me are I am a lighter skinned Indigenous person. I don't live on a reservation. Um, I am able bodied. I am financially secure because of my husband's work. Um, I have a high school education. Um, and I'm a cisgendered person. Um, my religion in this country isn't under attack or um, so I don't face persecution because of that or any reason. Um, some things that I do or have experienced though are um, racism, even though I am a lighter skinned um, Indigenous person. I Something I'm always wary of when I go to stores is how long I am in the store, how I'm carrying the items that I'm going to purchase, um, and if there's anybody following me on multiple accounts. Um, I've had people like the security people like follow me, um, and I don't know if that's because like was racism, you know. When I was in my first year of college, I had gone to UNC in Greeley, Colorado, and I had gone to the Ulta store and I was trying on um, like a lipstick or something, and this group of girls like they had told this elder white lady who's a security guard that I was stealing, and she came up to me and threw a bag at me and she said, you can put the items that you're stealing in that bag. And the girls, like four of them, white, well, they were all white, um, in college or maybe in high school, whatever. Like they started laughing. They found it hilarious that that had happened. And I kind of prior to that, living in Montbello, I was kind of sheltered in not experiencing a whole lot of racism. I mean, yes, it existed and I was aware of it, but I wasn't experiencing it in my community because everybody was of color, I guess, you know? And so moving to a community where it was majority white people it was a major culture shock for me. And I felt like below or like they were superior in some way because they had all of these experiences and just they like the people who lived in my dorm, they had better connections, you know, like they were able to connect on different things and I just felt like an outsider. And so that's something that, and I mean, outside of Montbello, I had experienced racism in different ways. Like my husband's ex stepdad, like used to call me Pocahontas, and I thought that that was just like something endearing or a joke that he liked to do, you know. But I didn't understand the undertones of racism in that, you know. It took me up until like, hey, up until like leaving my mother's home to really understand those certain things. Sophia. She has this troll doll that she likes to play with, but I mean, that's honestly not even, and of course I've experienced like when I go to the hospital, and I think that's just women in general, are women of color specifically, like we go to the hospital and we're kind of talked down to, like we don't understand concepts or kind of we're demeaned, you know, by these people who are supposed to be professionals, you know. And so yeah, I think it's very important that we're discussing these topics, and I understand that as a person living, a Native person living off of the reservation, I have my privileges. You know, I have running water. Majority of people on like the Navajo reservation, they don't have multiple reservations in the United States. That's not a luxury, you know. Or in a lot of the communities, there's like one grocery store, like 20 miles away, or like one hospital that's like hours away from their home, you know. And so even though I do experience certain things, like it's nothing in comparison to what people who have darker skin tones than me, or people who don't have an able body, or people who live in different communities than myself. Like I'm very privileged, and what work do I need to do to make sure that I'm helping those people gain those privileges, you know? So, yeah.
No, it was nice talking to y'all. I'm gonna have to head out soon for my class, but yeah, this was good and a very important talk.
Yeah. Thank you all for taking time to have this talk about the various types of privileges people have. Bye, everyone.
I'll see
Bye,
y'all.
guys.
Bye bye.